particular, our guest of honor, Mr. Paul Almond. Sir, it is such an honor to have you with us today.
Well, this is my first time in a military base, and I must say I'm most impressed. I was given the most wonderful tour and had the most wonderful tour guide in Lieutenant Commander Padre and so on and so forth, Jennifer Goss, and then being with my old friend Mike Allen, who is a writer of some note. And so I really thank you all. And as I said last year at the chaplain's retreat, I really feel I'm among friends with chaplains who are, first of all, parish priests, which is really a hell of a job, knowing some of the parishes. But they do wonderful work, and then they move on and get more training here, which I've met all these distinguished chaplains who are training other chaplains. And so, to my way of thinking, a chaplain is quite a remarkable person to be, and I respect them all enormously, but I also feel I'm one of them. So today I want to say a few words about my uncle, because first of all, when Jennifer said we're going to read what's in the bulletin, I said, no, Jennifer, you can't do that, it's so boring. But it actually turned out to be very interesting. I learned a lot of stuff about Uncle Jack. But I want you to know, of course, that I wrote me, a little scallywag from Shigawak. I wrote 2 books about him, which are already out. And the third book, The Gunner, which I'm here to talk about later, has him as a central figure. And also The Hero, which is about my father who had shell shock. Uncle Jack was instrumental in helping him get help, as it was called in those days. Not terribly successful, because Daddy finally succumbed to shell shock and was more or less incarcerated in a hospital for 20 years, so I never knew him. But I have a real treat for you here today, which I will end with. But I wanted to first of all tell you, in the biography, they gracefully skipped over how he joined up in the Boer War. But I want to tell you, it wasn't all the Anglicans facing Sir Wilfrid Laurier. What happened was, very quickly, if I have to, I don't know, anyway, I'm going to keep talking. He was a little country clergyman in Quebec. And all these, as you'll know, some of you who've read The Chaplain, all these forces, young men who didn't know anything about the military and turned up in all these ragged uniforms, came to Quebec City, and they were going to board a troop ship on Monday. And Uncle Jack didn't know what was. This is all documented, by the way, in various odd places that I've had to research. It's all true. He asked them, what are you guys doing here? And they said, well, we're off to fight for Queen Victoria. He said, really? Well, where? Well, on Monday morning we're going off. And he said, oh, who's your chaplain? Chaplain? We don't have a chaplain. Oh, there's a French-Canadian guy. But we don't have an Anglican. We don't have an... Well, he said, really? So on the Sunday morning service, when Frederick George Scott, who is the grandfather of one of my closest friends, was preaching in Holy Trinity Cathedral, he talked to the Lord Bishop. And in those days, Lord Bishops had, of course, to come from England, because no one in Canada would be worthy of being a bishop. So he said, my Lord, there is the troops, 1,000 young men are going off without a chaplain. And he said, good heavens, don't be ridiculous. Of course they have a... No, sir, they don't. So they talked to the commanding officer, and he said, well, I guess we better do something. Monday morning, true story, Uncle Jack, the commanding officer, and the Lord Bishop galloped in a caleche to the Lieutenant Governor's, where the Prime Minister was having breakfast, and they interrupted his breakfast. And they said, you know, Sir Wilfrid, I think he was Prime Minister. I wrote the book years ago. Anyway, they said, "Sir, they're sending off the troops," and he said, "Mon Dieu," whatever they would say in French. Mon Dieu, Scolien, what are we going to do? So he said, "Well, who are we going to?" Well, they said, "This young man." Well, what's he done? Well, he served on the Canadian Labrador. Ah, he said, "Send him." So Uncle Jack rushed home to his digs, got his dunnage bag, rushed down, jumped on the boat, and went off to serve. So that's like the inside story, but it's a true one. So that's some of the thing that goes behind. Now, he did establish the Lost Post Fund, which buries indigent veterans, which I'm horrified to say there must still be today. So you learn a great deal when you research these darn books, I'll tell you. So anyway, he did begin that with someone else. So it's still functioning today, the Lost Post Fund, which they said. Uncle Jack also, by the way, preached in 1916 in Westminster Abbey, which is rather exciting, I think. Letting a Canadian in, the most distinguished. I was there in September. It's an incredible building, as you all know. I hope you've all read Padres of No Man's Land, Duff Creerer's wonderful book. And he talks about how Uncle Jack reorganized the chaplaincy service. And I want to say that what impressed me is that when Uncle Jack got in there and reorganized things, the troops were saying, you know, what are you, these chaplains just preach a sermon on the Sunday morning, who needs that? Uncle Jack got them out to Suicide Corner where the Hun guns were trained and made them, and they gave out coffees, and they started to actually do something with the troops, as you guys do now today, but in those days they didn't, so that's kind of interesting. Now, here's the little gem, which is going to end my presentation, and then I will present it, I guess. His brother, Eric Almond, was my father, and the gunner is about that, and I'll talk about that later. And Daddy had shell shock, but he did get into Bishop's University, and when he was there, I guess in a flurry of writing, I found this loose leaf, which I've now incorporated into book 7. And in the loose leaf, he writes all these different essays about what it's like to be in war and what it's like. He didn't actually describe many actual events, but he talked about people, his mother. And I want to read you what he said, if I can do it without crying, about Uncle Jack. It's his brother. His brother turned up to take him to hospital. Okay, this is the gem, and nobody's seen it. He is a man of about 50 years of age, with dark brown flashing eyes, almost 5'8" in height, with the erect carriage and noble bearing which rightly belongs to only old army officers. A bulldog sort of a face, broad forehead, thick nose, heavy jaw and square chin, lines deeply carved in the cheeks and upper lip by suffering and fighting, but with humorous wrinkles around the eyes. This tremendous strength is offset by the dreamer's look and softened by sympathetic lines along the forehead. He appears big in every way, a magnetic, dominating personality and immense power of will, and a wicked temper firmly under control. Yes, some awful soul conflicts must have sculptured that face and grooved those lines of character. He has experienced and observed life, captain of his rugby and hockey teams at Bishop's College, 4 years as a lonely missioner on the bleak Labrador coast, chaplain officer with the Canadian Forces in 2 wars, rector of one of the largest churches in Montreal. That's Trinity Memorial Church, where I shall be giving the sermon in 2 days on Sunday morning. He has traveled extensively, mixed with all kinds and classes of men, observed other races and customs, experienced life in all its aspects, on the lonely Labrador, on the battle-stricken South African veldt, in those muddy trenches in Flanders, in city slums, hospitals, asylums, and jails. He has observed life's silent heroisms, its blackening sins, its tremendous struggles and soul conflicts, its divine unselfishness, its ultimate peace. He has held babies in his arms, swearing them into that great adventure for good, joined many hands in that perfect partnership of married love, closed tired eyes in death, and given the last rites to soldiers, mothers, fathers, and young girls. Yet, he has looked on life with all its glories and failures, its sins and sufferings, and found it worthwhile. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Chaplain General, John Fletcher, the Chaplain School, of course, myself, but the whole Chaplain branch, really, I have the honor of receiving this precious gift from you and from your family. It's a treasure for us, as I'm sure it has been for you.
Yes.
Chaplains who have carried their field communion kit into the battle space, as I and others in this room have done, are in a unique position to appreciate the value of this historic and war-worn communion kit. I know that I would not be easily parted from the field communion kit that helped me serve the needs of soldiers in Kandahar. And I'm sure that this communion kit held a very special place in the heart of your uncle. And I want to publicly acknowledge your great generosity in giving it to us. So to you, Mr. Almond, and to your family, our heartfelt thanks, and once again, God bless.
Thank you.